Though I do think the whole Rings of Power fiasco, in some way, is in part to blame from the Tolkien Estate. Why would you sell the company to like only the appendices of the story? Welcome everyone to Ramble Podcast, episode number 30. My name is Richard.
Austin over here.
Yeah, got to do our names every time now, so we're not guy on left, guy on right.
Absolutely.
But yet, if you looked at the title of the video, today is our episode on the Rings of Power versus the Silmarillion.
And we're doing this episode because Richard here just finished reading the Silmarillion, and it took you a little bit.
It did. It took me at least like 2-3 weeks.
Which is unusual. Usually you blow through books, and this one was more tedious.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not tedious is the wrong word. I had to be meticulous. And the reason is because I had to keep looking through names and family trees and maps.
More papers.
Like,
Tedious was the wrong word, I should say. Yeah, meticulous.
I can't just tear... like, Sanderson, I don't need to reference anything when I'm reading. I just read it and I go.
Yeah.
This one, I had to stop every once in a while and look at the map and go, okay, where am I? Okay, who are the families that are following?
It's, from my understanding, it's more like a history book, right?
Yes, I had to actually, like... And even then, I need to read it again.
Yep.
I wasn't starting to get it till the end.
Yeah.
And then I was like, names and family histories are starting to click together. I'm like, okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
But through most of the book, it was hard.
Right.
So,
And so the purpose of this video, and I think what will interest some viewers, is we are looking at the Rings of Power, which we, if anyone knows, we did not like the show. It was an interesting one. But we're comparing the Rings of Power and Silmarillion in this way. We do know the Rings of Power is not based on this, not based in quotes, we'll say, on the Silmarillion, because Amazon only has the rights to the appendices in The Lord of the Rings. However, the appendices in The Lord of the Rings essentially gives bullet point format of events that happen in the Silmarillion. Is that correct?
yes, it's a shortened, condensed version of events that happen in the Silmarillion and leaves out a lot of the detail.
Of course.
Leaves out quite a bit of things. So, but it does have some of the bullet points on there.
Right. So the Silmarillion isn't what the Rings of Power show is taking from exactly, because it doesn't have the rights to Silmarillion. So the purpose of this video is more to show what the Silmarillion is about and the lore of Lord of the Rings, why you see so many fans, including us, and I'd say more so you because you've now read the Silmarillion, why there's grievances over the lore changes and the differences and how cool Middle Earth is. So we're just using this opportunity to be like, hey, for those of you out here who haven't read the Silmarillion, there's a lot that I'm sure you have to say about this because I'm curious. I'm curious about some of the differences between the show and what Tolkien actually wrote. I'm curious as in what exactly the book covers, and we'll get into all that. So
yeah, I think most of the differences that the show does, it does make a lot of changes, but so does the original trilogy. The difference is the changes in the original trilogy ultimately end up to a good product. That's the problem with the Rings of Power, is they change a lot of stuff, and it's doesn't make the material better, doesn't improve anything, it's just a worse product. But today is kind of about the lore on what makes the Silmarillion special, what makes the whole story special, and why it's a difficult book to adapt in a standard format. You do have to be creative if you're going to... You're going to have to go kind of one of two ways. You're going to have to either hyper-focus on a singular incident, and then you have a bit more liberties. So maybe the tale of Baron Luthien. You could tell just that story, because there's a lot of detail in the Silmarillion about them, and you could just get really invested in those characters. Or you could tell a specific instant in Sauron corrupting the people of Númenor, and tell just that story. But Rings of Power is just kind of doing too much, and we don't care about any of them.
Well, to give the Rings of Power the benefit here is that they don't have really material to go off of. The thing is they have these bullet point formats in the appendices, so it kind of comes across as Tolkien definitely didn't write this. They're kind of trying to go from these points, but they're not. It's not a lot based on what Tolkien wrote.
I would say it's the difference between in the appendices. There are kind of flagpoles throughout the story. And if the showrunners wanted to, as long as they get from point A to point B, however they get there, that's fine. And sure, I think fans would be happy with it as long as it was good. But as long as the A and B are still there.
But are they changing the A?
They are changing those. That's the problem. Is there's a lot of room to be creative here. Just don't change the big points. Like the things that Tolkien actually talked about, don't change those. You can make up whatever you like in between, but don't change the big stuff.
Gotcha. So yeah, Rings of Power, we're really just, this is going to be focused on the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
And just to show, we had our episode about why the Rings of Power, and it was more so just us going, we don't like this. But
yeah, actually, we even
want to talk about that for a couple minutes just to...
Sure.
So we're going to talk about Rings of Power real quick, and then we promise the rest of this will be focused on Middle-earth, cool lore stuff. But Rings of Power, if you could more condensedly say what your big grievance about the show is, what is that so we can get that across?
Writing, number one. It's the number one thing. If they changed the lore, but the writing was good and the characters were interesting, yeah, I'd watch the show.
Yeah,
cool. It'd just be it would be a story based on Tolkien's work. All right, it would stand alongside. But it's not good writing. The characters are not interesting. So it wearing the moniker of Tolkien is just insulting. So
it seems very generic fantasy, and it just, there's a video that Richard sent me that I wish I could remember the guy's name. I'll put it on screen here.
Yeah,
because this guy had a great video on it. My thoughts exactly is that he said the Rings of Power seem to lack love. Yeah. And although that's a very generic thing to say, lacking love, like how do you put that together? But he showed several scenes throughout the show where it showed that in the show there was a severe lack of care behind it and detail, and then they were kind of just checking boxes of, all right, we need this person to be in this location and we need them to feel this way, without putting the effort and getting that character to that point. Or with just being like, oh, we have to have this character be saved. Okay, let's make him drop his axe. This checkbox thing, and he does a great job. Like I said, his name will be right here. Props to him, because that really... It
was a great video about it, yeah.
I mean, my feelings exactly. It's just that it's hard to pinpoint one big problem with it, because it's all small problems that create a big problem, is how I'm looking at it.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a lack of care, and someone maybe comments like, oh, there's plenty, see, the characters that the creators do care. Look at all these Easter eggs to Tolkien's work, and oh, they're referencing this stuff. And I think that's just kind of, Easter eggs are the poor man's quality. Like, an Easter egg is not substance. Like, I want the show to actually, like, these moments to actually be real and actually be impactful, rather than just a throwaway Easter egg that someone like me or someone else could like, oh yeah, that character's there, or hey, look at that little thing in the background.
Gotcha. Well, then we should talk about what is a big lore breaking moment in the show from your knowledge of it, because I know one I'll throw at you.
Sure.
And tell me if this is right. I've not read the Silmarillion, but Númenor. The show apparently goes through this that Númenor's fate is predicted, or they kind of see these visions of Númenor will fall.
Yeah, and Númenor.
Númenor will fall. But could you expand on what is the difference between the actual lore and the Rings of Power?
Yeah, so in the show, the Queen Regent, the Regent of Númenor, has one of the, trying to remember, one of the 7 stones, not the Orthunk stone, but okay. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, through it can see the fall of Númenor. And yeah, that's not a thing. In the Silmarillion, it's incredibly surprising to everyone, including Sauron.
That Númenor falls.
Yeah, and how bad it is. Like, it is
unpredictable
and devastating. Like, the Númenorians are going to fail, and a lot of Númenorians are going to die. But so when, spoilers, I guess, by the way, but I don't think it counts.
We're going into Middle Earth lore here, so it's going to be background on Middle Earth.
Basically, over hundreds of years and I think 13 generations of Númenorians, they become envious and fall to Sauron's lies and want to invade the Undying Lands to become immortal themselves. Well, at least the king thinks he gets to. And so they march against the Valar and lose. Obviously bad. They're effectively angels. They're close to gods. They lose miserably, and that's where Sauron thinks it's going to end. Like, yeah, all the Númenorians are going to die. Great.
Sauron's got this. Right?
Yeah, and so he's like, oh, he's sitting, like, Sauron's literally at Númenor going, awesome, hey, I just got rid of my biggest enemy. We're doing great. Númenorians are dumb. And God basically comes down and is like, yeah, not enough. And creates a sinkhole from Númenor where Númenor falls into a hole with all these, just completely destroys it and these waves destroy coastlines of Middle-earth and irreparably change the landscape of the entire planet. And then he takes the world that's flat and makes it into a globe and literally removes the Undying Land from the realm of Arda. Like, oof.
Wow.
Like, the Númenorians, like, push, and the Valar just really just keep reaching.
Mind you, I thought I was, like, the biggest Lord of the Rings fan ever, and all this stuff you're saying is, like, didn't know that. So I am my fandom. I'm not giving credit to my fandom.
Thing is, okay, look, I'm going to get a lot of things wrong because I only read it once.
I'm not here to correct you.
I need to read.
I believe everything you're saying.
People in the comments are going to correct me because I'm going to get names wrong. I don't know how to say a lot of it. I tried doing pronunciations, but I'm terrible at it. So I'm going to get stuff wrong. It's a complex thing you need to read multiple times. There's other works to reference. It's complex. Got anyway.
But the Rings of Power clearly changes some things in the lore, and something like that where no one saw Númenor coming in the Silmarillion. It was a complete surprise, and in the show they have these visions where the main character, or one of the main characters, sees it coming, and it's
important because the Númenorians, a big part of it is their pride, and they are so powerful in Middle Earth. They completely wipe the floor with everyone, including Sauron. Sauron's not even a threat to them. That's how powerful the Númenorians are. And at the height of their pride, they think they can basically take on the kingdom of God. And they are proven wrong. Hard. But now in the show, they kind of see it coming. They know that that's a very different dynamic. It makes them less interesting.
And which again, I think supports the theory a lot of people are, not the theory, but just the feeling people have where Rings of Power is more of a fanfic, if anything.
Yeah.
Where it's going off the appendices of Lord of the Rings. So you're going to see differences from the appendices, which they're filling a bunch of stuff, and what actually happens in the Silmarillion. That's the problem. And is there any other big lore change you can remember that was a severe difference between the Rings of Power and the Silmarillion?
This is something that maybe in the show they fix. Maybe they left it out in the beginning on purpose.
Okay.
Could be. I doubt it, because in the beginning they tell about how the elves flight to Middle-earth, how they're going after Morgoth. Well, in Silmarillion, it is drastically important to the entire history of the elves. It's incredibly important. Is the Noldor, a group of the elves who create the Silmarils. Again, I'm going to get the names terrible. Okay. Let me get this right.
He has it, by the way, for
God,
those who can't see.
hurts.
He has an entire mapped out ancestry of.
I'll send it to you so you can have the digital. We can put it on screen. But so Feanor creates the Silmarils. Morgoth steals them after killing the trees that basically give light to the world. Morgoth leaves to Middle Earth. Feanor's like, I'm gonna get them back, and he goes to another group of elves. They're like, hey, we need your boats to get across.
But keep going.
Oh, I know. It's rough.
Yeah.
Basically, the elves have infighting, and the first time they slaughter, the first time elf on elf violence happens in the Undying Lands. And they use that and they leave, and the gods forsake the Noldor and say, like, you're not allowed to come back. You slaughtered your brethren, and everything that you do in Middle-earth will fail. All of your endeavors will all end in misery.
They were essentially banished to Middle-earth.
Banished and also cursed. Like, everything that you do will end in failure.
Okay.
And it's kind of true. It kind of is what happens. And so that's a big reason. So Galadriel, she she also leaves in that similar fashion. I don't know if she really participates in the elf on elf slaughter. It's not really clear, but she may have. But she's also banished from Middle Earth. But it sets up everything that is to come of why the elves fail, why they are in many ways just as prone to fall as man, just differently.
Right.
It sets a very different context where the show is like, oh yeah, Morgoth stole the Silmarils and all the elves went out to get
So the
vanquish
Rings
them.
of Power is essentially saying that the elves went to Middle Earth to vanquish Morgoth.
Yeah, and everything's
Right?
good.
And that's what the whole point was, to vanquish Morgoth. Whereas in the Silmarillion,
It's a
there was
tragedy.
elf on elf violence, and they were essentially banished and cursed to Middle Earth.
Yeah,
Okay, that's a big difference.
they voluntarily went. They were going there anyway, but the Valar basically, you're not allowed to come back.
Okay.
And so it sets up a very different. Where like, yes, they should be going after Morgoth, but also, like they were not right to kill their own kind and out of jealousy and all these stuff. So it definitely puts the elves in a different light. Where in the Rings of Power, it's just, oh, the elves went off to kill the bad guy. It makes them so simple and not as interesting or complex story.
And not to mention, and again, someone coming from someone who didn't read the Silmarillion, but I've heard people insulted by the opening scene of Rings of Power where Galadriel had this little boat going down the stream,
Yeah.
and these other kids were chucking rocks at it. The grievances I heard about that were that the Undying Lands are supposed to kind of be this Zen-like, perfect, peaceful utopia.
Yeah,
And
basically.
although it was like kids being kids, that sort of thing, it was a difference from like the Undying Lands literally being heaven. Is that accurate? Do you feel that as well from reading the
Yes, I've heard the explanation that maybe those are the kids of Feanor, because Feanor's kids are a bit more violent, a bit more.
Okay. Right.
Maybe. I doubt they thought that far ahead. The only reference I can think from that one is maybe the Sundering of the Elves, where the Noldor kill the seafaring elves and steal their ships. Mm-hmm. And
me agreeing like, oh yeah, I remember that.
well, there's also when the Noldor actually take the ships and leave, they actually abandon Galadriel and her family in the Valinor. They leave them there, and the Noldor leave with the boats, and they have to go the long way around, and a lot of them die. And so when they get there, they burn the ships. So maybe that's a reference to the Noldor sinking the ships of the... Hold on. I have my papers here for a reason.
If you find it quickly, that's actually impressive. You have like 20 sheets of paper here.
The Teleri, I believe.
Okay.
No, the Sindar. I believe it's a Sindar.
The Sindar.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go with the Sindar. Someone will correct you. It's okay.
Someone's going to correct me. Anyway, they're the ones that built the ships. So maybe that's what the reference.
Okay.
But again, Easter egg. That's not enough. Show me the actual stuff of what happened. But if they can't do that because of rights, then tell a different story.
I follow. So it seems like there's a few big differences between Rings of Power and Silmarillion. And again,
And time frame wise,
there's another big difference is the time frame.
yeah, just everything's shrunk down. Where a big part of the story is the difference between immortals and mortal men, and how
Elves live forever.
Exactly, and mortal men, over generations things can change, and where great men start off and they've learned these hard lessons, and over time their sons and their grandchildren, they will fall prey to lies and deception because they never lived the days before. There's a reason why that men are easier to trick and they're easier to fall.
Also important to note, the Rings of Power takes place during the Second Age only, so far.
Yes.
The Silmarillion takes place during the First and Second Age, so it covers primarily the First Age and then also gets into the Second Age by the end. Is that correct?
Yeah, it covers a lot more. More of the page time is in the First Age, even though the First Age is less time than the Second Age.
And is this tell me if I'm wrong here as well. This is my Wikipedia research, so correct me if I'm wrong. the first age of Middle Earth ends with the fall of Morgoth, correct?
Yes.
The second age of Middle Earth ends with the first fall of Sauron, I believe. And then the third age ends with, we saw the movie. So at the very end of the movie where Sauron falls the second time, are those the 3 points of what makes the ages end and the new age begins?
I believe so. Again, I probably glossed over it. It was probably mentioned and I missed it.
Okay.
Exactly.
This is from my just little research that I did, but
Probably right, yeah.
Just from like not reading the book, but doing as much research as I could online. So I believe that's where the ages begin and end, and it looks like the second age that's occurring in the Rings of Power. They showed the first age with Morgoth falling, or they didn't show that, but they mentioned it, right?
Basically, the third age starts with the fall of Númenor. After the fall of Númenor, the third age starts, I believe. I think that's it.
Okay. So it's the third age starts either fall of Númenor, first fall of Sauron, which probably happened around the similar time frame.
Well, Sauron dies at the fall of Númenor.
Okay, so that is the end of the second age then.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So it depends which, are we going to go with fall of Sauron or fall of Númenor? If they happen simultaneously, that started the next age.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you quickly then about the Silmarillion. As in, do you recommend people read this to find out more about Middle Earth, or who would you recommend this to? Because we're not going to go over and rate it. It's more of it's not your narrative of, fun adventure time, right? How would you explain this book, and would you recommend people to read it?
I would actually, it's not a hard recommend to literally everybody. If you fell in love with The Lord of the Rings, and you just love everything about it, and you want more, read the Silmarillion and take your time. For God's sake, don't tear through it. Pull up maps, pull up family trees and charts, and take your time reading through it and to really digest it. The reason why, to kind of give an example on why I enjoyed the Silmarillion is when I read The Lord of the Rings, one of my favorite moments was reading about the Ents and just having a question, where do the Entwives go? And I researched online, and I was looking at maps, and I found interesting stuff of Tolkien's actual writing and his, him giving clues and maybe hints about where the Entwives went. If you're someone like me, and that's something that interested you while reading Lord of the Rings, you'll probably like the Silmarillion. But if you read Lord of the Rings and you're like, yeah, the poetry was a little slow, I tried to skip some of that, I just wanted to get more to the action of the plot, then maybe the Silmarillion isn't for you, and just watch a YouTube video about it.
So reading the Silmarillion is more for hardcore fans, you'd say, people that are, if you have an obsession with Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings, all that, it's worth the read.
Thing is, it also is, I'm invested, and because I'm invested, it's such beautiful writing and wonderful stories. Honestly, if you're not sure you want to read the whole Silmarillion, just read the story of Beren and Luthien. Self-contained story. It's great. It's a great story. And then put in the context of the rest of the world, it's so meaningful. So there's a bunch of stuff in there.
Okay.
Some tragedies, some love stories, some histories of battles, and great. It's all fun.
Neat. All right. So Silmarillion is a what out of 10? Rate it now. We talked before this episode going, should we rate this book? And I think that's the first one we went, no.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult because obviously world building would get the 10 out of 10. Duh. That's of course.
It is world building.
It is world building. It's the best world building one can possibly do. But the other aspects, it's hard to rate it.
It's kind of like rating a biography.
Yeah. How do I rate, I guess, characters? There's some really great individual characters, but there's also some interesting characters that you don't really get too much of their perspective. You don't get a lot of dialogue with them. You get stories told about them. So how am I supposed to judge that?
Yeah, it's not that kind of book. It's a very niche book for really big fantasy fans.
But it's also special. I really did enjoy it, and I will read it again. I know I will pretty soon.
Oh, also very important to mention this is that the Silmarillion, although it's J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it but did not complete it.
Yes,
Christopher Tolkien, his son. Go on about that. Yeah.
Well, his son compiled most of it is written by J.R.R. Tolkien. The words on the page are written by him. But it is organized and compiled together And some edits are made by his son, Christopher Tolkien.
And Christopher Tolkien he was like in his 90s when he died, and died, I think, in 2020 or recently, within the past 5 or 6 years.
2020 he died.
2020. Yeah,
I believe so.
That sounds right. And now the Tolkien Estate is ran by Tolkien's
Grandson.
grandchildren, but I think a group of them. I don't know how exactly it's divvied up, but I will say this. It's odd to me. Amazon bought the rights to the appendices in The Lord of the Rings months after Christopher Tolkien, the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, stepped aside from the lead of the Tolkien Estate.
Yeah.
I believe that happened like months apart back in 2017 is when Amazon snagged those rights, which is a curious timeline. What does that lead you to think?
It makes a lot of sense. Why? Though I do think the whole Rings of Power fiasco in some way is in part to blame from the Tolkien Estate. Why would you sell the company to like only the appendices of the story? I mean,
If you're
just
gonna,
don't do any.
If
then
you're
don't do it
sell
all.
Tolkien's work, might as well sell the Silmarillion so they can tell the story correctly.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying.
Like either sell them the rights to the whole thing so they can actually use it and produce something of quality, or don't sell them anything at all.
So almost am I interpreting this right? That almost with the Tolkien Estate selling only the appendices are kind of putting handcuffs on them when they're making the show.
But here's the thing. Amazon could have taken this opportunity to do something different. Instead of trying to tell all of this stuff, like all of the, basically the fall of Númenor and this whole Second Age thing, focus on something that they actually have. Focus on, like, there are references to Beren and Luthien in the appendices. Tell that story. Plenty of detail there, and you can have some
Detail
liberties with
appendices?
it. Yeah, but you have good characters. You have characters that people will root for, and you have like an actual narrative. There's a very like well laid out narrative there.
So it's a fault of both parties.
Yes.
Both Amazon and the Tolkien Estate, you'd say.
I was more so with Amazon, but I think Tolkien Estate has some to blame.
Because I'm sure as well with Amazon being a little handcuffed here, there's probably stuff that they might have wanted to tell in the appendices, but would stray too close to the Silmarillion, so they couldn't say it because of that.
I know of one instance, and they do not have the rights to the First Age. The Amazon doesn't. They are only allowed to reference it briefly for context of the Second Age.
Okay.
So they were able to show a brief glimpse of Morgoth, but they can't actually tell any story with Morgoth.
Because that would be taking
the First Age.
That would be taking from rights they don't have.
They can't do. They can't show us Valinor or else other than brief glimpses because that's the First Age stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff they're not allowed to show us and tell because that's the First Age.
Okay.
Other than the necessary stuff to even tell the story. So
yeah. So I think is there anything else you want to go in detail? Like, what's something cool about the Silmarillion that someone could take out of this that really made you enjoy this read? Because it was a meticulous read, but you left it feeling more fulfilled about Middle Earth.
Definitely, it's ultimately a story about immortality and immortality versus mortality, and how both are gifts and a curse. How literally the god of Arda, which is the planet Middle Earth is on, says he gave the gift of death to humans. That death is a gift to them.
I like that.
And where the elves are always stuck. They never get to die. Even when they're killed, even their souls float in the halls of Maadros and eventually will get reborn. But they're stuck there forever. Where men, when they die, they go to the halls of Mahadros and go somewhere. Don't know where. Even the Valar don't know where they go.
Wow.
Who knows? And so that is the gift of death. And so that's how the elves see it, and where the men see the gift of immortality.
I like that a lot. I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something that I think you should read next is and it's a short. Just read the chapter of Beren and Luthien that goes over that a lot.
So if you could recommend a short read for anyone, then it's read that Beren and Luthien. Is that the correct? Okay, and
That's not too long.
Okay, that's a portion of the Silmarillion.
Yeah, it's one chapter.
Well, it's just a chapter.
Just a chapter.
Very cool. Okay, so I guess we'll leave it with that then.
Yeah,
with
I think so.
Silmarillion, a lot of lore in there. There's big differences between Rings of Power and Silmarillion, although they don't have the rights to it. So
But
it's
mainly,
a really sticky situation.
The show just doesn't have the heart that in a lot of the messaging and story and all of the important questions of life. Doesn't have any of that. The Rings of Power is much like an empty shell.
This has been Tutor Ramble, everybody.
See you next week.
Bye.